It's clear that the Niners could have had Vic Fangio, but didn't necessarily make the concessions they would need to make, considering he runs a 3-4. They run a wide 9-4-3. So he ended up in Miami with Mike McDaniel, and he's just like gloating about it. Like, you needed to be a little flexible to work with Vic. And of course I am, but other people aren't. Were the Niners sort of right to sort of stick with, I think from their perspective, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. What they got going with Chris Kasarik is working, and, don't overhaul it. On the other hand, it's Vic Fangio. What do you think?
Yeah, I saw you and Jesse debating this, and I saw, McDaniel basically talking about, referencing Kyle as an egomaniac for not being willing to switch off. I think in a perfect world, Kyle would love to never walk in the defensive meeting room ever. That he would just be an offensive coach, and that he would have a Wade Phillips type coordinator or Vic Fangio, some old trusted hand that he could just say, "You got the defense, big boy," and never worry about it at all. But I think when it came down to this decision, I think the Niners made the right decision. Why? Because it's not about scheme as far as would you be willing to switch to a 3-4 from a 4-3. It's more than that. It's about how you built your football team. Nick Bosa is not a 3-4 defensive end at all. He would have to be a 3-4 outside backer. Technically, most teams that use the 3-4 will drop the outside backer into coverage at times.
Doesn't Joey play? Joey plays in a 3-4.
Yeah, he plays in a 3-4. But I mean, Nick doesn't drop. I mean, he doesn't drop. So I personally think that just fitting their personnel, like what's Kevin Givens? He's a one gap penetrator, get up the field guy. What's Kalia Davis? He's a one gap penetrator, get up the field guy. Several of their players. What you'd have to change out like 6 defensive linemen. What's T.Y. McGill? He's a one gap penetrator, get up the field guy. So, and I think they really like Chris, and they think he's a big part of their culture, and they didn't want to switch their front. And Wilks was sitting there willing to take the front as is, go with the wide 9. It gave them some continuity, but I think it had more to do with, like, Christian Wilkins. Give you an example. He is the Dolphins' best defensive lineman. Christian Wilkins' advantage is that he is scheme versatile. He's really best in a 3-4, a 34 front at the defensive end spot. You can play him as a 4-3 tackle, but he's not ideally suited in there. He's more of a head on a head, stripe on a stripe, 3-4, 2 gaps, command both gaps. That's what he does. So that's their best lineman. I think the Niners defensive linemen, for the most part, the guys they've gone with up to this point, are 4-3 guys. And if you switch to a 3-4, you'd have to rework good portion of your room. So I think I'd rather have Fangio because of Fangio's track record, but to me, the idea of switching to a 3-4 was a non-starter.
I think it should have been a starter. I'll take Fangio. I don't give a damn what he wants to do. The way, like, his version of the 3-4 to me is very one gappy. There's one player that's 2 gapping. It's the 5 technique. It could be Armstead. Everyone else is 1 gapping. Bosa would go from, having a hand in the dirt to standing up. He's not going to drop. He'd be Alden Smith. Alden Smith didn't drop. You'd have Javon Hargrave. He'd be Justin Smith. You'd have whoever you want as the nose tackle. It could be Kinlaw. You could have Armstead as the 5 technique, and you could have whoever as the Paris Harrelson on the other side. I think it could have worked. And it just seems like there's no good reason to not bringing Vic Fangio. I don't know. But I don't know. We'll see.
I mean, Vic Fangio has how many Super Bowl rings? None.
Who's a better defensive coordinator than Vic Fangio? Steve Wilks?
No, but I think Steve Wilks was a better fit here. I mean, it's just a matter of this. If you felt
they didn't want to change it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I get it.
It's just a matter of, like, how your D line is just strength of your football team. You feel like you got a pretty good D line. The Niners, I believe, led the NFL in quarterback hits last year. They didn't obviously lead on sacks, but they got a bunch of hits in the quarterback. Also, you're going from the ultimate get up the field, one gap, penetrate, put heat on the quarterback, very simplistic scheme, to a 3-4 front, which is oftentimes kind of a, read and react type scheme. And I just think that that's problematic in year one. Now it could work, but it's going to take some time. And I just don't think that they felt like they had the time to put into it, especially in the offseason where you don't get a lot of time with these guys. They would have had to rework, I think, probably at least 2/3 of their defensive line and go for different guys. I just think I think all things being equal, that's why they went with Wilks. And also maybe they felt like Wilks that their secondary needed a little bit of infusion of talent and of coordination. And I'll say this, there's no doubt they've added some good players on the back end, and the guys that they do have back there are seemingly really hell-bent on being improved. So Steve has sold them on the idea that they weren't that great last year. So I hear what you're saying though. Fangio is a proven defensive coach. He's got incredible. He probably, money being equal, preferred to be here.
And it's like we're talking 3-4, 4-3. That's like 25% of the snaps. The other 75% is nickel, and it's just whatever.
It's more about personnel. I don't think it's about scheme. It's about personnel.
You give Fangio this personnel, I think he'd be able to figure it out. But here, look, I got to go to dinner.
Okay,
I got one more bonus topic, and I think we should talk about why Dak Prescott is the most overrated quarterback in the NFL. I don't know what it is about Dak Prescott, but I woke up today and I decided, you know what? Dak pisses me off, and I need to talk about it because I feel like he gets all this credit for being, first of all, he broke his leg. That was terrible. And he came back. So he was the comeback player of the year. But also, he's a cowboy. You know what I mean? He's a cowboy. Kind of like Jimmy Garoppolo with the Niners. He gets all this credit for being on this team. If he were on the Minnesota Vikings, if he were on the Arizona Cardinals, if he were on the Washington Commanders, no one would give a fuck about Dak Prescott. But he's on the Cowboys, and everyone makes a big deal, and then he faces the Niners in the playoffs, and that man shits the bed in ways we have not seen. I mean, I know the Niners have a really good defense, but no quarterback has played as poorly against that defense in the playoffs as Dak. I mean, Dak finds new ways to shit the bed against the Niners defense. You could argue the only reason the Niners made the NFC Championship the last few years is because Dak just shit all over himself. And repeatedly, he faced the Niners first one time at home, faced them the next year, and played even fucking worse. How do you do that, Dak? I think it's fair to say that this guy is a total media creation because he's on Dallas. And he's a nice guy, and he's got a nice smile, and he came back from adversity, yada, yada, yada. He sucks.
I mean, he's one of these guys that he was a great story until he wasn't. He was a great story when he was a 4th-round pick that became their franchise quarterback. But then he got paid, and then he leaves you wanting more. I just think that the Niners, you can blame Dak, but I think that the Cowboys are just a bad matchup for the Niners, and it's hilarious too because the
terrible
Cowboys,
coaches over there.
I just think one, I'm not a big Mike McCarthy fan. I think he's super overrated. But also the Niners, that 2 years ago in Dallas they ran it up and down the field on them. I mean, they came out in that first drive and just said, here's Elijah Mitchell in your grill. How you liking that? So I just think it's a bad matchup for Dallas, but I love how Dallas also falls in love with guys in the draft. Like they fell in love with Mozzie Smith from Michigan, and Mozzie is the ultimate looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane. I mean, I watched him. He did not do that much at Michigan, but he's a freak. He's huge and he's strong and he's fast and he's this and he's that. And in reality, he doesn't make plays on the other side of the line of scrimmage. And, it's like they're probably going to wind up cutting Neville Gallimore to create a roster spot. I'd rather be there to get Neville Gallimore off their hands as they go with Mozzie Smith. I think it's going to be a huge whiff.
Let's come back to Dak. Hold on. I'm not done with Dak. Dak, I'm not done with you. I feel like he was a good quarterback before he broke his leg. But since he's come back from that broken leg, I feel like he's a little skittish.
The ball's coming out.
I hate to say that about a professional athlete. Like, I'm not a professional athlete. I'm not tough. He's tough. But, you're a little skittish, bud. And when there's bodies around him and he can't really step into his throws, he throws those awful interceptions like the one to Diamador Lenore. I mean, he led the league in interception percentage last year. He was awful. He was a freaking disaster last year. And I think he's a lot like Jimmy. Jimmy was good until he tore his ACL, and then I thought he was skittish after that. He didn't really want to get touched. I don't think Dak wants to get touched. I think they're both in survival mode. And I think the best thing that's ever happened to the Niners is that they've gotten to face Dak 2 years in a row in the playoffs. His quarterback rating has been below 70 both times. Geno was in the 90s. Stafford was in the 90s. Rodgers was in the 90s. I mean, yeah, it's a really good defense, but dude, what is your problem? Dakota. That is your name. Until you can post a 71 quarterback rating against the Niners, we're calling you Dakota. North Dakota, East Dakota, one of them. Not the good one.
He reminds me of Derek. He reminds me of Derek Carr.
Thank you. In a bad way. He
reminds me of Derek Carr in that.
Yeah.
You know, they've and you know what? These guys are all more of a man than me. I mean, seriously, to play quarterback in the NFL, you got 300-pounders who are fast and they're rolling by you like cars on the freeway.
If someone broke my leg like they broke Dak's, I wouldn't. Yeah. Well, I never played football to begin with, but I wouldn't come back. Fuck that. I'm done.
You know, Dakota, I think Dak is one of those guys that he's just at this point, he's thinking about him. He's thinking about long-term longevity. Yeah.
How do you
preservation? Right. Yeah. And they're getting rid of and Derek Carr's a little bit like that too. I feel like Derek Carr, you know, I think Raider fans going to love Jimmy. People think, oh, they're not going to love Jimmy as much as Derek Carr. They're going to love Jimmy more because
he's a little tougher than Derek.
Jimmy's going to stand in. Jimmy's going to stand in and take a hit. He's going to let those receivers work their way open.